That night, the rain seemed to pour all the wrath of the heavens onto the glittering streets of Boston. Thunder rolled above, drowning out the ragged breathing of Vivian Gonzalez as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Beside her, Sophia, her 6-year-old daughter, curled up in a pink raincoat, clutching a worn-out stuffed cat named Mr. Whiskers. "Mom is... he's still chasing us," the little girl whispered, her voice trembling. Vivian glanced into the rearview mirror. The headlights of a black car flashed faintly through the curtain of rain, flickering like the eyes of a predator in the dark. She swallowed hard, forcing her tone to stay calm. "Of course not, sweetheart. We're almost safe." But she didn't even know where the safe was anymore. She only knew she had to escape Derek Collins, the man who once swore to love her, and had become her worst nightmare. 3 years earlier, Derek had been a handsome, soft-spoken police officer. He'd shown up at a charity gala Vivian hosted at Boston Central Hospital, where she worked as a psychologist. Back then, he made her believe she'd found solace after losing her husband in a car accident. Everything about him seemed genuine, kind, protective. But after the wedding, the mask began to crack. He grew irritable, secretive, and plagued by sleepless nights. Soon, gambling and drugs followed. Then came the stranger's tattooed men, loitering near their home shadows that never spoke. That's when Vivian realized she and her daughter were entangled in something far darker than she could imagine. That very night, in a drunken rage, Derek had hissed through clenched teeth, "The people in Mexico will pay good money for you two. Don't bother running." And she knew then, if she didn't flee, she'd never see another sunrise. Vivian turned sharply onto Boylston Avenue, the car tires slicing through sheets of rain. Her only thought: find people, find light. A golden glow emerged through the downpour, a sign reading Martin & Co. Fine dining, shimmering in the storm. Elegant, opulent. Luxury cars lined the curb, Bentley, Aston Martin, Porsche. Without hesitation, she pulled over, unbuckled Sophia, and ran through the torrent toward the door. The chime of the wind bell above the entrance rang faintly as she stumbled inside. Warmth enveloped her instantly, the crackle of a fireplace, the rich scent of wine and expensive perfume. Heads turned. Well-dressed diners paused mid-conversation, eyes narrowing at the soaked woman clutching a child. She looked like a misplaced brushstroke on a perfect canvas. A host hurried forward. "Ma'am, this is a private restaurant. May I ask?" Before Vivian could respond, Sophia slipped from her grasp. The little girl's green eyes glimmered in the soft light as she ran toward the far corner. There, beneath a golden lamp, sat a man alone. His black suit fit impeccably, his wrist adorned with a dark leather Patek Philippe. His neatly combed hair fell slightly across his brow, giving him an air of careless elegance. His face, sharp cold, impossibly handsome, radiated danger. The room itself seemed to hold its breath around him. Sophia stopped before his table, voice quivering. "Mister, please, help my mom. Evil men are coming for us." Silence fell over the entire restaurant. The man's wineglass halted midair. His silver-gray eyes lifted slowly, first toward the child, then to the trembling woman by the door. That look was enough for Vivian to realize this man was not ordinary. "What's your name?" His voice was deep, low, but calm like a quiet storm. "Sophia. And my mom's name is Vivian." "Mister, the evil man has a gun." He set the glass down. His gaze sharpened, cold, decisive. Without looking away, he pulled a phone from his pocket. "Vincent," he murmured. "We have a situation at Martin & Co. An armed man is approaching. Handle it discreetly, no panic." Then he rose tall and commanding. Vivian had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. "You're safe now. Come here." The steadiness of his tone, unshakable, almost hypnotic, drew her closer, despite every instinct screaming to run. He pulled out a chair for her and motioned to the waiter. "Hot ginger tea. And a shawl." Vivian sat, hands trembling. "Who are you?" she whispered. A faint smile curved his lips, one that never reached his eyes. "Just someone who hates seeing children afraid." Outside, an engine roared. Vivian turned in horror. She saw Derek's silhouette through the fogged window rain, dripping from his leather jacket, and something metallic glinting in his hand. Before she could cry out, 2 unmarked black SUVs screeched in from both ends of the street, blocking his car. Men in black suits emerged, swift, precise, trained. Within seconds, Derek was on the ground restrained. A silver-haired man stepped forward and whispered something into Derek's ear. The color drained from his face. Vivian stared in disbelief. "What did you do?" the stranger beside her answered. "Made sure you'll never have to see him again." His voice wasn't loud, but carried the weight of power, undeniable and absolute. When the storm finally eased, the city lights shimmered across wet pavements. In the backseat of a luxury car waiting outside, Vivian held Sophia tightly, trying to convince herself this was real. The stranger sat beside them, his gaze fixed on the night beyond the window. "You didn't have to help," she said quietly. "I don't even know your name, and have nothing to repay you." He turned, silver eyes glinting in the dim light. "My name is Andrew Martin, and you owe me nothing." The name hit her like a jolt. Martin Holdings is the financial empire that owns hotels, restaurants, trading platforms, and private airlines. Rumors said Andrew Martin was rich enough to buy half of Boston, and ruthless sufficient to own the other half. But beneath the wealth, there were darker whispers, ties to the Italian Mafia manipulation of politics. Disappearance after his sister's mysterious death 3 years ago. Vivian swallowed. "You helped me." Just because my daughter asked, Andrew leaned back. Voice barely above a whisper. "No, because her eyes remind me of someone I once lost." A heavy silence fell. The car turned down a long, tree-lined road leading to the city's outskirts, toward the Martin estate, a grand marble fortress overlooking the ocean. Streetlights swept across his face, beautiful, cold, unreadable. The Martin mansion rose before them like something out of another world. Iron gates parted automatically, revealing a courtyard lined with fountains and trimmed hedges. Vivian felt like she was stepping into a dream, one too perfect to be safe. The silver-haired man, Vincent, was already waiting in the grand foyer. "Sir, everything's ready." Andrew nodded once, then looked at Vivian. "From now on, you and your daughter will stay here. No one gets near you unless I allow it." Her eyes widened. "Here I can't," he interrupted softly. "If you go back, he'll find you. And next time, I might not arrive in time." Vivian clutched Sophia's hand, glancing around at the towering ceilings, the winding staircase, the scent of jasmine. It was all too much, too foreign, too dangerous. "Who are you really, Andrew Martin?" she whispered. For a brief second, his cold eyes softened. "The kind of man you shouldn't trust. But tonight, I'm the only one you can." That night, when Sophia had fallen asleep in a white-curtained room, Vivian stood by the window, staring at the sea. The moonlight shimmered across the waves like shattered glass. The salt wind brushed her face sharp and cold. Had she escaped one kind of danger only to fall into another? Down in the courtyard, light glowed from the library balcony. Andrew stood there, a glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon. He looked like a man haunted not by enemies, but by ghosts only he could see. Vivian couldn't explain why, but she felt the storm outside wasn't the only one that had raged that night. Just before dawn, as she dozed off on the couch, a soft sound stirred her. The door creaked open, and that low, husky voice filled the quiet. "I couldn't sleep knowing you were still awake." She turned, startled. Andrew stood at the doorway, no jacket now, only a white shirt with undone top buttons. Moonlight touched his face and his eyes gleamed like silver fire. "You scared me." "Apologies," he said with a faint smile. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't regret coming here." She paused, then whispered, "If regret could take me back before tonight, I'd still run." He studied her, his gaze deep and strangely gentle. "Then rest easy. No one will hurt you or your daughter again." He started to leave, then stopped. "Vivian, there's something you should know. The man you're running from, he's more dangerous than you realize." Her breath caught. "You know Derek." He stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. "I know him too well. He owes lives more than one." His eyes flashed cold as steel. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll start finding out who Derek Collins really is." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Vivian standing there, heart pounding. She knew her life had just taken a turn from which there was no return. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, steady, relentless like the heartbeat of fate itself. At dawn, as the first rays of light touched the sea, Sophia woke and ran to her mother's arms, whispering sleepily, "Mom, I dreamed Mr. Andrew would save us and turn this house into a castle." Vivian smiled faintly, stroking her daughter's hair. Yet somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling stirred. Perhaps he didn't just save us. Maybe he's about to change everything. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The first morning in the Martin estate was unnervingly quiet. Sunlight slipped through the silk curtains, spreading like honey across the polished wooden floor. The faint aroma of Arabica coffee mingled with the soothing scent of sandalwood. Vivian sat silently by the bed, watching her daughter sleep. Sophia's brown hair was tousled, her small lips curved into a peaceful smile. The sight softened Vivian's heart, but the unease inside her had not yet faded. Everything here was too perfect, too foreign, like she had just stepped from hell into an artificial heaven. She rose quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor. Beyond the glass doors stretched a magnificent garden, hundreds of white roses swaying in the salty breeze. A few gardeners in black uniforms moved soundlessly like shadows at work. From a distance, she saw Andrew Martin walking along the gravel path. Morning light caught on the rolled sleeves of his shirt, highlighting the lean strength of his arms, the taut muscles shifting with every controlled movement. He spoke through an earpiece, his voice low, clipped, authoritative, the kind of tone that commanded without ever needing to shout. Vivian watched him longer than she intended, stirring a strange mix of fierce security and curiosity. The breakfast room in the Martin estate looked like it belonged to a five-star hotel. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, a long table covered in white linen, and open doors revealing the ocean beyond. On the table, freshly baked croissants steamed beside a fruit platter arranged like art. Andrew sat at the head of the table reading the Boston Globe with a cup of black coffee. When Vivian entered, he folded the paper neatly and looked up. "Good morning, Dr. Gonzalez." His voice was calm, polite, distant, but there was a warmth beneath it, quiet, yet unmistakable. Vivian steadied herself. "Thank you for everything you did last night. But I can't stay here. I need to go back to Boston." Andrew didn't answer right away. He set the paper down and lifted his gray eyes to meet hers. "If you leave now, he'll find you within a day. The police can't protect you, he's part of them." "You seem to know a lot," she replied cautiously, a note of defiance creeping into her tone. A faint smirk crossed his lips. "I know everything there is to know about Derek Collins, and about the man behind him." Vivian froze. Something in his gaze, something too steady, too cold, belonged to a man who had looked death in the eye and didn't flinch. "Who are you really, Andrew Martin?" she asked softly, her voice barely breaking the morning stillness. He paused, then placed his cup down carefully. "I'm someone who once chose power over peace, and lost everything that mattered because of it." His voice grew heavier, each word falling like stone. Vivian didn't respond, but she saw the flicker of sorrow in his eyes, the kind that only comes from a loss that never healed. A breeze drifted through the open window, stirring the newspaper on the table. The headline caught her attention. "Martin Holdings expands to South America. Allegations of illicit investments surface." She looked up slowly. "They say you're tied to the Italian Mafia." "Is it true?" Andrew's brow furrowed slightly, but his tone remained even almost too calm. "In the real world, Vivian, there are only two kinds of people, those who hold power and those who are crushed by it. I chose power so I'd never have to watch someone I love be crushed again." The words were cold but not threatening. They sounded like a confession, a scar that had closed but never stopped aching. Vivian said nothing more. She sat down quietly, inhaling deeply, trying to steady the chaos inside her. At noon, Vincent, the silver-haired butler, guided her on a walk around the estate at Andrew's request. His tone was formal, yet kind, the man who'd once served royalty. "Mr. Martin is a very private man," he began as they walked through a long corridor lined with antique paintings. "But you should know this place once belonged to his family before the tragedy." Vivian frowned. "Tragedy?" Vincent hesitated before answering. His younger sister Amelia disappeared 10 years ago. She was only 9. The police never found her body. Many believe it was connected to a failed human trafficking operation. Vivian's heart tightened. Human trafficking? Vincent nodded. Mr. Martin spent everything he had searching for her. But in the process, he lost his faith in justice. Since then, he's found his own way to fight the darkness. Vivian noticed a small corner covered in white flowers as they walked through the garden. In the center stood a simple marble plaque engraved with the words, Amelia Martin, 2006-2015. No picture, no epitaph, just a name and silence. By dusk, the sky over the Hamptons burned gold. The sea beyond the cliffs shimmered in amber light, waves brushing gently against the shore. Vivian stood on the balcony watching. Below, Andrew was practicing shooting with a few black men. Each gunshot cracked through the air, clean, precise, merciless. Vivian's stomach twisted. He was the man who had saved her. And yet somehow she feared him more than she feared Derek. When he finally lowered the gun and looked up, their eyes met. She turned away quickly, but not before catching the faint curl of a smile on his lips, like he'd known she'd been watching all along. That evening, dinner was served in a smaller, more intimate dining room. The glow of candles softened the edges of Andrew's face, lending him an almost human warmth. He poured her wine, his movements deliberate and graceful. "You were right," he began quietly. "I did work with the Italian Mafia once. My family had ties to La Famiglia Romano. They controlled most of the East Coast's underground finance. After Amelia's disappearance, I turned to them for leads. But eventually, I learned the truth." Vivian's voice trembled. "What truth?" He swirled the wine in his glass, the deep red catching the candlelight. "That the people who took her were part of the same organization I had trusted." Her breath hitched. "And you, what did you do?" Andrew's gaze dropped to the glass. "I erased them one by one." There was no pride in his words, only a chilling calm. "You killed them," she whispered. He didn't answer. His silence said enough. The air between them grew heavy. Finally, Vivian spoke, her voice steady but soft. "Suppose you wanted me to fear you. Congratulations. But if you want me to trust you, I need to know why you helped me at all." Andrew leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on hers. "Because when your daughter ran to me that night, I saw Amelia in her eyes. I once promised my sister I'd always protect her. I failed. Maybe. This is my chance to keep that promise, even if it's not to her." His voice cracked faintly low and raw, like a confession whispered to the dark. Vivian hadn't expected her heart to ache like this. A part of her wanted to run from him, this dangerous world he embodied. But another part wanted to stay to understand, because she too knew what it was like to lose someone, to live haunted by what you couldn't save. Sophia walked in just then, clutching Mr. Whiskers. Her big green eyes blinked up at Andrew. "Uncle Andrew, why don't you ever smile?" Both adults froze. Andrew blinked startled, and then for the first time he smiled. "It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Maybe because I forgot how Sophia." "Then I'll teach you," she giggled. "When you're sad, look at someone you love. Then you'll smile without trying." Vivian's throat tightened. Andrew bowed his head slightly, his eyes flicking toward her. The candlelight shimmered in his silver gaze, softening something within them. Late that night, the mansion slept, but Vivian couldn't. Restless, she wandered down the dim hallway and noticed a faint light spilling from the library door. She pushed it open gently. Andrew sat on the sofa, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of whiskey in one hand, and an old photo album in the other. She hesitated at the door, but he spoke without looking up. "Can't sleep either." Vivian smiled faintly. "New place. Hard to rest." He motioned for her to come closer. "Come. There's something I want you to see." On the open page was a photograph of a young girl with brown hair laughing under the sun. "Is this Amelia?" she whispered. He nodded. "She was the reason I believed the world could still be good." Vivian sat beside him, the air between them heavy with quiet sorrow. "Do you ever think about letting go?" Andrew chuckled softly. "Letting go. For people like me, that's a luxury we can't afford." "Maybe you've just never tried," she said gently. He turned to her eyes deep as the sea. "And you? Have you ever tried trusting someone like me?" Vivian inhaled slowly. "I don't know. But tonight, when I watched Sophia sleep, I thought maybe I want to. A long silence passed. Then Andrew set his glass aside and leaned closer, voice barely more than a whisper. Vivian, you shouldn't trust a man like me. But I want you to. Her breath caught. His warmth brushed her skin, and her pulse raced not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. The world seemed to fade, leaving only breath eyes and a fragile thread pulling them closer. Then Andrew drew back, his expression composed once more. Tomorrow, I'll show you the files on Derek Collins. So you'll understand why he's not just an abusive man, but something much worse. Vivian nodded softly. Thank you. He stood heading for the door. But before he left, he paused, his hand resting on the handle. Vivian, he said quietly. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the darkness. It's realizing you're starting to want to stay in it. The door closed behind him. Vivian sat there listening to distant waves. Her heart caught between fear and something dangerously close to longing. Outside the Hamptons, sky glittered with stars. And somewhere among them, perhaps Amelia's spirit was smiling because her brother had finally found a reason to live again. Boston's sky was pale and dim that day, a faint gray veil stretching over the Hamptons sea, turning the waves into shards of shattered glass. From the second-floor balcony of the Martin estate, Vivian sat curled in a woolen robe, a cup of mint tea cradled in her hands, her gaze distant fixed on the horizon. Below, Andrew was on the phone. His voice was low, rough-edged calm, but commanding a quiet authority that made the person on the other end too afraid to interrupt. He never needed to raise his voice. His power was in the certainty of every word he spoke. When he turned and their eyes met eyes across the expanse of the silent garden, Vivian quickly looked away. She didn't know why, only she feared he might read the confusion in her thoughts. Since that night in the library, the space between them had changed, not something visible, but enough for her heartbeat to falter whenever he came near. Sophia, on the other hand, had quickly grown attached to Andrew. The little girl wasn't afraid of him, nor did she see the coldness that adults sensed. To her, Uncle Andrew was the man who made heart-shaped pancakes, told bedtime stories in a soothing baritone, and each morning asked, "Has my little princess smiled today?" But for Vivian, things were far more complicated. She saw in him depths he tried to hide, layers of restraint, pain, and something unspoken. Each time his gaze lingered on her a moment too long, she felt a wave of emotion she couldn't name. Something fierce, protective, yet quietly yearning. That afternoon, Vincent knocked gently on her door and bowed. "Mr. Martin requests that you accompany him somewhere, Doctor." "Where to?" she asked, wary. He said, "It's time you learn more about Derek Collins." Vivian's heart gave a small, involuntary jolt at that name. The black Bentley glided through tree-lined roads under a misty drizzle. Raindrops streaked across the windshield, soft as breath. Andrew drove in silence, his jaw clenched, one hand gripping the wheel tightly enough that the veins on his wrist stood out. Vivian stayed quiet, studying his reflection in the window, the hard line of his mouth, the rigid focus in his eyes. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked. He glanced at her briefly, his voice low. "To the place where I lost everything." They arrived at an old cemetery on the northern outskirts of the city. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and dried roses. Andrew walked ahead, his footsteps heavy with memories. He stopped before a worn gravestone. The inscription read, "Amelia Rose Martin, 2006-2015. Always the light of my world." Vivian's voice trembled. "Your sister." Andrew nodded, eyes fixed on the stone. "She disappeared one September afternoon. My mother said she was playing in the garden, and then she never came back. The police said it was a kidnapping. I believed them until the first photo arrived." His voice broke slightly, as if the words were dragged through pain that still bled. The photo showed Amelia, tied up in some warehouse outside Naples. They wanted ransom money. I paid, of course. But when I went to the meeting place, there was nothing, just her dress covered in blood. Nobody. No trace. Nothing. Vivian stood frozen, the air around them thick and still. She didn't dare interrupt, afraid a single word might shatter him. He went on quietly. "I hunted them. Every last one. I swore they'd vanish from this earth, and I ensured they did. But killing them didn't bring Amelia back. A twisted, pained smile crossed his face. When Sophia looked at me with her eyes the same color as Amelia's, I understood why I saved you. I wanted just one chance to make right what I failed before. Vivian hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his shoulder. You don't have to carry it all alone, Andrew. He turned to her, and for a heartbeat, the ice inside him cracked. You don't understand, Vivian. My darkness doesn't leave room for anyone else. If I pull you into it, it'll destroy you too. Then let me decide that, she whispered. Don't choose for me. They stood silently, two souls caught between grief and the faint, dangerous spark of something new. On the drive back, neither spoke. Yet the air between them had shifted, not cold, not distant anymore, but threaded with quiet understanding. As they passed through the old Boston district, Vivian saw a familiar sign, Boston Mental Health Clinic. She smiled faintly. That used to be where I worked. Andrew's voice softened. You help people even when there's nothing in it for you, right? It's not about money, she said. I think everyone carries cracks inside. And if you're gentle enough, sometimes the light finds its way in. He was silent for a while, then asked quietly, Do you think light could ever find its way into mine? Vivian looked at him, her voice tender. If you can still feel pain, Andrew, then there's still light. He lifted his gaze toward her, and in that fading sunset, the hardness in his eyes melted into something almost human. That night in the study, Vivian opened the file Andrew had given her. Inside were photos of Derek bank statements, transaction logs, and pages bearing the insignia of an international smuggling syndicate. One document stood out, Operation Cobalt, Human Cargo. Her blood turned cold as she read the note beneath it. Targets single women children, aged 5 to 10, with no close family ties. Scrawled in Andrew's handwriting on the margin. Derek intermediary. Supplier to Romano. Romano. Vincent once mentioned the same name the organization that had destroyed Andrew's family. The pieces began to fall into place. Derek wasn't just a violent man. He was part of a global trafficking network. Vivian closed the file, her heart pounding. Andrew hadn't saved her by chance. She and Sophia had been the following names on that list. When she stepped out onto the balcony, Andrew was already there, the moonlight tracing the edges of his face. How long have you known all this? She asked, her voice trembling. He didn't turn around. Since before you met him. She froze. You were following me? No, he said softly, shaking his head. I was following him. Derek Collins owed money to Romano. He sold hospital records to pay his debt. Your name was on that list, a widowed mother with a young daughter. He chose you, Vivian. And I decided to stop him. Her chest tightened. You knew he would come after us. Andrew turned then, his eyes glinting like steel in the dark. I knew, but I didn't expect him to act so soon. Vivian stared at him, this man who had saved her and caged her all at once. You rescued me, she said softly, but you've also locked me inside a prison. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. If that prison keeps you and your daughter alive, I'll gladly be your jailer. But I can't live in fear forever, Andrew. He paused, exhaled slowly, his tone quieter now. I know, and I'll end this. Romano is dead, but his son Victor Romano has taken over. He's in New York. He wants Derek to deliver you and Sophia as repayment merchandise. Vivian's heart clenched. So, it's not over yet. Andrew's gaze locked on hers. No, but this time I won't let history repeat itself. That night, the sea roared louder than usual. Vivian lay awake staring at the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Andrew's steady footsteps followed by the soft click of the library door. She hesitated, then followed. Through the small gap in the door, she saw him sitting alone in the dim light. His hands clenched a photo lying on the table. A girl's smiling face. Amelia. Vivian's throat tightened. She stepped inside quietly. He looked up, exhaustion shadowing his expression, but not surprise. I thought you'd be asleep. I couldn't, she said softly. Not when I see how much you're hurting. He smiled, faintly, sadness flickering behind it. You don't have to do anything, Vivian. Just live. That's enough. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for his. No, Andrew. You need someone to remind you there's more than darkness out there. He looked at her for a long time, trying to memorize her face. Aren't you afraid of me, Vivian? Her voice was gentle, honest. I am, but I'm more afraid of a world where you don't exist. A soft gust slipped through the window, flickering the lamp's flame. Andrew rose slowly, stepping toward her. The distance between them shrank to a breath. Vivian, he murmured, voice rough, torn between restraint and desire. Then, instead of a kiss, he leaned down and pressed his lips lightly to her forehead, a touch brief but searing. Sleep. Tomorrow I'll take you somewhere safer. She stood still as he walked away. When the door closed, his scent lingered, whiskey, cedarwood, and solitude. That night, Vivian dreamed of Amelia, standing in a garden of white roses, smiling softly, whispering something she couldn't hear. Then the light around the child grew brighter, like dawn breaking through mist. When Vivian awoke, the sky was pale gold. Outside, Andrew was already preparing the car. She knew then a new storm was coming. But this time, she wasn't just someone to be saved. She would stand beside him, face the past, and help him confront it. As Andrew opened the car door for her, his eyes met hers, holding both a warning and a vow. If the world dares to touch you again, it'll have to go through me first. And in that instant, Vivian realized something had begun to bloom amid the shadows of fear and loss. Trust. The early wind swept along the Hamptons coast, salty cold, carrying whispers of things unspoken. The black Bentley glided down an empty road, its tires leaving faint wet trails across the slick asphalt. Inside, Vivian sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the faint reflection of the sea fade into mist. Boston was vanishing behind them, shrinking into memory, leaving a strange mixture of relief and unease in her chest. Beside her, Andrew Martin drove with his usual focus eyes, forward, brow slightly furrowed, as if calculating every move ahead. Are you sure this place is safe? She asked softly. Andrew glanced at her, his silver-gray eyes softened. No place is ever truly safe, Vivian. But there they won't find you. They, she echoed. He was silent for a beat before answering. Victor Romano, my cousin. The man is now running what's left of the organization. Vivian turned to look at him. The name Romano, spoken in his low, steady voice, felt heavy metallic, like something carved in blood. When the car turned off the main road and entered a lane lined with towering pines, a modern glass house appeared in the clearing ahead, isolated, elegant, gleaming beneath the pale sun. A quiet lake shimmered nearby, reflecting the surrounding forest like a secret mirror. Is this your home? She asked softly. Andrew nodded one of them. It was a simple answer, yet it hinted at a world she could barely imagine, a world of power, wealth, and ghosts that refused to rest. Inside the house was airy and minimalist. The scent of pine wood and freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air. On the wall hung abstract paintings, and a small framed photo stood near the window, a smiling girl with soft brown curls. Amelia. Vivian reached out to touch the frame, her fingers trembling slightly. Andrew's voice came quietly from behind her. She loved painting the sea. The waves never looked the same, no matter how many times you watched them. Vivian turned, meeting his gaze, tired, deep, unbearably lonely. You still blame yourself, don't you? She whispered. He smiled faintly, without humor. People stop blaming themselves only when there's no one left to remember. By noon, Andrew had to leave. He said there was business to handle. His tone was calm, but something in it, something too controlled, made Vivian uneasy. She stayed behind with Sophia. The house was serene, too serene. Every tick of the wall clock sounded louder than it should. Sophia sat at the dining table, surrounded by colored pencils. What are you drawing, sweetheart? Vivian asked gently. The little girl grinned, eyes sparkling. It's you, me and Uncle Andrew by the sea. There's a rainbow, too. Vivian smiled faintly. A rainbow, uh-huh. Uncle Andrew said after every storm, there's always a rainbow. Her daughter's joy warmed her heart and broke it a little. Vivian stared at the picture 3 small figures beneath streaks of blue and gold. Something inside her stirred painfully, something she hadn't dared name. Evening fell. Andrew hadn't returned. The sky was heavy with rain clouds. Vivian stood on the porch, unease creeping up her spine. The phone rang on the table, an unknown number. "Hello," she answered cautiously. A deep male voice replied, smooth and chilling. "Dr. Gonzalez, I'm glad you finally picked up. My name is Victor Romano." Her body froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "I don't know you." "Oh, but I know you," he said softly. "And your lovely little girl. You see, I once heard Amelia Martin had eyes just like hers." Her blood ran cold. "What do you want?" she forced out. His tone was patient, almost amused. "Only what's mine. Andrew owes me a life. You and your daughter. Will be how he pays." Vivian's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but the line went dead, leaving only the faint echo of his laughter. Her hands trembled as she tried to call Andrew. No answer. Outside, thunder rumbled and the rain began to fall. When Andrew finally returned, his white shirt was soaked and streaked with blood. Vivian ran to him, voice shaking. "Where were you, Andrew? Someone called Victor Romano. He said he knows me, knows Sophia." Andrew froze mid-step. His expression hardened instantly. "He called you?" Vivian nodded, panic rising. "Please tell me what's happening." He stepped closer, placing both hands on her shoulders. His voice was rough, low. "Victor wants to drag me back. He's using you to do it." "But why? He's your cousin, isn't he?" A cold, bitter smile crossed his face. "In our world, blood only matters when it serves power. Victor inherited the Roman Empire. He wants me back to merge his financial channels." I refused. Now he's trying another tactic. Vivian's eyes dropped to the dried blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt." He shook his head, voice flat. "It's not my blood." A shiver ran through her. But even through the fear, something else pulsed, trust inexplicable but intense. That night, Andrew locked every door and ordered extra guards around the property. He sat before the fireplace, its glow carving sharp shadows across his face. Vivian approached quietly and set a steaming mug of coffee beside him. "You can't keep running like this," she said softly. "He won't stop." Andrew stared into the fire, then murmured, "I'm not running. I'm waiting. Waiting." His eyes met hers, glinting like tempered steel. For him to make the first move. "I need to see who he's working with, who's on the inside. Once he shows his hand, I'll end it." Vivian sat beside him, her voice barely audible. "You can't fight an empire alone." He exhaled slowly, almost smiling. "I've dismantled one before. I can do it again." She studied him, the exhaustion beneath his composure, the quiet fury in his stillness. "Aren't you afraid of dying, Andrew?" He gave a faint laugh. "I already died once, the day Amelia died." Near midnight, Sophia woke to the storm. She ran to her mother's room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mommy, I saw someone in the garden." Vivian's heart stopped. She pulled the child close and hurried to the window. Through the rain, 2 dark figures stood near the fence. "Andrew," she called. Within seconds, he appeared, gun in hand, movements swift and precise. He switched off the lights and motioned for silence. "Don't make a sound." A sharp crack split the night glass, shattered a bullet lodged in the wall where she'd been standing moments earlier. Andrew pushed them behind the wall, signaling his guards. Shots erupted outside, quick, controlled, terrifyingly efficient. Then, silence. Minutes later, Andrew returned, his face unreadable. "They weren't here to kill us. To send a message. A message that he knows who I'm protecting." Vivian's pulse hammered as she looked at him. This man soaked armed, his jaw clenched with determination and something more. After the chaos, the house was once again quiet. Sophia slept soundly beside her mother. Vivian sat on the porch, staring out at the fog-drenched sea. Andrew stood beside her, silent as the waves. After a long pause, she asked softly, "Do you ever wish you were just normal?" He smiled faintly. "Normal people don't survive in this world. But they get to love without fear." He turned to her, the faintest shadow of pain crossing his features. "And you, Vivian, if you could go back, would you live differently?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, because then I wouldn't have met you." His expression softened. For a moment, the world outside the rain, the guns, the vengeance seemed to dissolve. Only the two of them remained suspended in fragile calm. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "Vivian, I don't know if what I'm doing is right, but I do know I can't lose you." Before she could answer, he leaned in. The kiss came suddenly, warm, desperate, unguarded. It carried everything they'd both been holding back. Fear, longing, and a deep ache neither dared to name. Vivian trembled, but she didn't pull away. She could feel the grief in his touch, the way he held her, as though she were the last light he had left. When he finally broke the kiss, his breath was ragged. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "but some things can't be stopped." They spoke no more that night. Yet from that moment, everything changed. The line between protection and love had blurred beyond recognition. The next morning, Vivian woke to the sound of waves. Pale light filtered through the curtains. Andrew was gone. On the table lay a folded note in his precise handwriting. "I have to meet Victor. Don't leave the house. I'll be back before nightfall." The ink was still fresh. Vivian's chest tightened. She looked toward the living room, where Sophia played with her crayons, oblivious. A heavy dread settled over her. Meanwhile, in a skyscraper in New York, Victor Romano stood before a panoramic window, smirking as he watched a live satellite feed of the house where Vivian and Sophia hid. "My dear cousin never learned to let go of what he loves," he murmured, voice smooth as poison. "Prepare everything. Tonight he'll finally understand no one escapes the blood in this family." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, and the dangerous game Andrew thought he controlled had just begun. At dawn, the storm that had ravaged the Hamptons through the night finally broke apart. Pale sunlight streamed weakly through a veil of gray clouds glinting off the wet sand like shattered glass. Vivian stood by the tall window, her gaze lost beyond the horizon. Her thoughts, though, were anything but still. She didn't know when Andrew had left, only that when she woke, the armchair he always occupied was empty, and the warmth he'd left behind had vanished like morning mist. The cup of coffee she'd brewed for him the night before sat on the table, now cold and untouched. Beside it lay a folded note in his steady handwriting. "Don't leave the house. It'll all be over soon." She traced her fingers over the ink as if she could still feel the rhythm of his heartbeat in every stroke. But there was only the chill of paper. Inside her, fear and faith warred in silence. Andrew was facing his own blood, his cousin, his past, the world she could barely comprehend. A world ruled by money, loyalty, and blood, where silence could kill and mercy was weakness. By noon, Sophia appeared, her hair tousled, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. "Mom, Uncle Andrew isn't home yet." Vivian knelt to meet her daughter's eyes, brushing the curls from her face. "He had something urgent to take care of, sweetheart." "He'll be back soon?" The little girl frowned. "I dreamed Uncle Andrew was hurt. There was an evil man with a gun and he fell." Vivian forced a soft laugh. "It's just a dream, honey. He's stronger than you think." But she couldn't hold her daughter's gaze for long, afraid the child would see the terror hidden behind her calm voice. Near dusk, tires crunching over gravel echoed beyond the gate. A black car stopped in front of the house. Vincent Andrews' loyal aide stepped out, removing his gloves, as he walked briskly to the door. Vivian ran to meet him. "Vincent, where is he?" The older man bowed slightly. "Mr. Martin is safe. For now." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean by for now?" Vincent sighed. "The meeting with Victor didn't go as planned. He was ambushed during his escape. But he managed to get out. He's recovering in a secure location." Vivian gripped the edge of the table for support. "He's hurt, isn't he?" Vincent said nothing. His silence was enough. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She paced the room, the amber light from the lamp casting restless shadows across her face. She remembered his last words before leaving. "Don't be afraid." "I know what I'm doing." Now everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Outside, the ocean murmured in the dark, the sound of the waves and wind filling the vast emptiness of the house. Vivian wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. She didn't know that far away through a small camera hidden in the ceiling corner, Victor Romano was watching her on a screen, his smirk faint, his fingers lazily circling a glass of red wine. My dear cousin still hasn't learned how to keep the things he loves. Untouched. 3 days later, Andrew returned. The door swung open, and there he stood, his shirt darkened with dried blood, his right shoulder bandaged, his eyes hollow, yet burning with life. Vivian ran to him, her voice breaking. My God, Andrew, you're hurt. He raised a hand gently, a tired smile playing at his lips. It's nothing. I'm still standing, see. But when she touched his shoulder, he tensed, jaw tightening against the pain. Vivian felt tears sting her eyes. You don't have to carry everything alone, Andrew. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. If I fall, who's going to protect you and Sophia? The words hit her like a blow, simple, raw, unbearably sincere. She didn't respond. She only pressed her ear against his chest and listened to the uneven rhythm of his heart, intense, frantic, alive. Later that night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Vivian went to the study. Andrew sat beneath the soft light of a desk lamp surrounded by folders filled with codes, financial reports, and grainy satellite photos. You're still working, she asked quietly. He looked up, that familiar, faint smile flickering. I'm not good at sleeping when things are unfinished. She moved closer. It's about Victor. He nodded slightly. He's expanding the trafficking network, moving people from South America to the East Coast. He's not selling goods, Vivian. He's selling lives. She froze. Dear God. Andrew shut the file slowly, then turned toward her. I once thought that staying silent was the safest choice, that fewer people would die if I didn't interfere. But Amelia died because of my silence. And now, if I stay quiet again, I'll lose you too. His voice was low, heavy with pain, and something more profound, guilt that no forgiveness could cleanse. Vivian's heart clenched. You can't save the whole world, Andrew. But if you need someone by your side, I'll be there. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his voice shook slightly. You don't understand. Standing beside me means walking the line between blood and sin. Once you cross it, there's no turning back. Vivian stepped closer, laying a hand over his chest, feeling the heat of the wound beneath. Then I'll walk with you. For a moment, his eyes flared like a dying fire finding new life. The next day, headlines exploded across every news outlet, Martin Holdings. Under federal investigation, allegations of money laundering tied to Romano Syndicate. The world moved fast, brutally, and relentlessly. Vivian sat frozen in front of the television. She understood immediately this was Victor's counterattack. He wasn't trying to kill Andrew. He was trying to destroy him. Andrew entered calm to the point of menace. Don't watch that. Lies are like venom. The more you listen, the deeper it sinks. But what will you do? They have evidence, Andrew. He gave a humorless laugh. Evidence Victor forged himself. Every account and every transaction is under fake names he created for me. Vivian gripped his hand. Then let me help. Please. I'm a forensic psychologist. I worked with the Massachusetts Bureau before. I know how to read behavioral patterns and trace data leaks. For the first time, he looked genuinely startled. Behind her gentle eyes was something unyielding conviction. He exhaled, nodding slowly. All right, but on one condition. What condition? If this spirals out of control, you take Sophia and run. Don't come back. She met his gaze unwavering. Do you really think I'd ever leave you? 3 days later, they left for New York with Vincent. The city glittered beneath them from the penthouse windows, an ocean of lights that felt more like a trap than beauty. Andrew stood near the glass wall, sleeves rolled up, watching the traffic flow far below. You're going to meet Victor, aren't you? She asked quietly. Yes. After everything he's done, you still think you can reason with him? Andrew's mouth curved faintly, cold, resigned. I'm not going to reason with him. I will look him in the eyes. Before I end it. Her chest tightened. End it with blood. He turned toward her, silver eyes glimmering like ice. There are men in this world who only understand that language. That night, rain swept through the city again, painting the skyline in silver streaks. Vivian sat alone in the living room, the ticking of an antique clock echoing in the silence. A soft knock came at the door. She opened it. Vincent stood there solemn. He's gone, Miss Vivian. What Mr. Martin left hours ago. He didn't want you there. The door closed behind him, leaving her in suffocating quiet. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling, torn between fear and understanding. Outside, thunder rolled across the Manhattan skyline. And in her mind, she saw Andrew's eyes again, gray as a storm filled with fury and love. Vivian didn't sleep that night. She opened his laptop, scanning the encrypted files he'd left behind. Line after line of code account numbers and offshore transactions filled the screen. Then something, a pattern. Every fake account led back to a single name, Victor Romano Foundation. Her heart raced. She called Vincent immediately. I found it. All the fabricated evidence, everything points back to Victor's foundation. If we expose it, he's finished. Vincent's voice came quietly through the phone. Mr. Martin doesn't want to fight that way. He wants to finish this his way. Vivian's voice broke. He's going to get himself killed for that monster. She grabbed her coat before Vincent could stop her and ran out into the storm. The warehouse by the Hudson River was nearly deserted, just the whisper of rain against rusted metal. Yellow light from a single bulb flickered across the wet floor. Andrew stood opposite Victor Romano. Two men bound by blood, divided by everything else. You still don't get it, Andrew. Victor sneered. The world doesn't belong to the merciful. Andrew's voice was quiet, unshaken. And you don't get it, Victor. The moment you sell a child's fear or a mother's tears, you stop belonging to any world worth ruling. Victor laughed coldly, the sound echoing through the vast emptiness. Look at you, the mighty Andrew Martin undone by a woman and her little girl. Pathetic. Andrew said nothing, but his gaze flicked toward the door where Vivian now stood drenched and trembling. Andrew, she cried, voice breaking. Victor smirked. Ah, the savior herself. He raised his gun, aiming at her. Everything happened in a blur. Andrew lunged forward, pulling her to the ground. The gunshot cracked through the air, the smell of gunpowder mixed with rain. When the smoke cleared, Victor was gone. Andrew lay on his side, his arms still wrapped around Vivian. You're bleeding, she whispered, panic rising. He smiled faintly, breath ragged. Just grazed. You got here in time. She pressed her hands to his wound, tears mingling with the rain. Don't you ever leave me like that again. Andrew looked up at her, his eyes soft, his voice barely audible. I won't. Not now. Not when I finally have a reason to live. Outside, police sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The last storm was passing, but the clouds were only beginning to part inside them. And as lightning flared over the Hudson, his eyes reflected a single unshakable truth, the longing to love and to be redeemed. The wail of sirens and the flashing lights from that night haunted Vivian for days. In her mind, she could still see Andrew lying in a pool of blood, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on her with that faint, reassuring smile, like a fragile beam of light cutting through a storm. Now, as he lay in a private hospital under an alias, everything seemed safe on the surface. But there was no peace inside her, only the heavy, gnawing silence of fear. The hospital room was still and bright. Sunlight filtered softly through the large window, washing over the man lying unconscious on the bed. His right arm was wrapped in bandages, a fresh wound on his shoulder. Beneath the crisp white sheets, Andrew looked both strong and breakable, as though even one more breath might shatter the illusion that he was still there. Vivian sat beside him, her fingers entwined with his, her heart. A storm of feelings she couldn't name, half love, half fear, half guilt. You always want to protect everyone, she whispered, voice trembling, but you never let anyone defend you. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt like danger waiting to return. Vincent entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He'll recover, Miss Gonzalez, he said calmly, steadily. The doctor said the bullet only grazed the shoulder bone. But he needs at least a week of rest. Vivian nodded, faintly eyes still fixed on Andrew's face. Thank you. Vincent, how long have you worked for him? The older man gave a gentle smile, his expression touched with affection and sorrow. 20 years. I've seen him change from a proud, reckless young man into a man carrying the weight of an entire empire. He used to laugh easily and believe in the good of the world until the day Amelia died. Vivian looked up. Amelia? His sister Vincent nodded. He loved that girl more than life itself. Her death, well, it was a blade that never stopped cutting. You're the first person who's made him think he might be capable of love again. Vivian's hand tightened unconsciously around Andrew's. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. To love a man like Andrew Martin was to walk straight into the storm without an umbrella big enough to survive it. 3 days passed. Andrew still hadn't fully woken. Sophia had gone to school with Vincent while Vivian stayed at the hospital. She barely left his side, afraid that when she did, he would disappear, as if this fragile piece could dissolve at any second. He stirred on the 4th day as the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. Andrew, she whispered. His gray eyes opened slowly, unfocused momentarily, then sharpened into the calm steel she knew so well. But this time there was warmth, soft, unguarded, fleeting. You're still here, he murmured hoarsely, the corners of his lips curving faintly. Vivian nodded, tears spilling before she could stop them. You thought I'd leave. He looked at her for a long time, then tightened his grip around her hand. I saw you in my dream. You called me back. She bent forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. Even in another life, I'd still call you back. For a moment, the chaos of the world seemed to fade. There was only the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and the fragile, fierce love born in darkness, enduring like a light that refuses to die in the storm. When Andrew was discharged, Vincent had already arranged a new safe house, a secluded villa, hidden among the maple forests of Connecticut. No media, no guards, no noise, only wind and the whisper of leaves. Is this a good idea? Vivian asked as the car stopped at the gate. Andrew smiled faintly, reaching for her hand. Safety isn't about where you are, but who's beside you. The words struck something deep inside her. The days that followed were the calmest they had known in months. Andrew worked quietly in his study, while Vivian resumed her online classes, teaching disadvantaged children something she'd once loved before her life turned upside down. Sophia played in the yard, her laughter ringing through the trees, bright and unbroken. Sometimes Andrew stood by the window, watching the two of them from afar, his expression softening in a way that made him look almost human again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he sat on the porch while Vivian brewed tea. Can we ever really leave it all behind? She asked quietly. He stared into the distance where the maples glowed gold in the dying light. I spent half my life chasing power, only to realize it can't keep the people I love. She smiled faintly. That sounds like philosophy. He shook his head. No, just the truth of a man who's lost too much. Later that night, they sat before the fireplace after Sophia had fallen asleep. Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his shirt. What will you do next? He said. The evidence against Victor had been handed to the federal agents. He'll be on the run soon. And you? He paused, eyes flickering with the firelight. I may have to testify, and when I do, they'll drag up everything I've ever done, every crime, every deal I once made. I don't know what happens after that, except that I won't let you and Sophia be caught in it. Vivian lifted her head, meeting his gaze. Please don't talk like we're temporary, Andrew. Sophia and I were not people you protect. You forget we've already lived and almost died with you. Her voice trembled but stayed firm. Andrew exhaled softly, his eyes darkening. I haven't forgotten. I'm just afraid that when you see all the darkness I've hidden, you'll stop loving me. Vivian reached up her hand tender on his face. I don't love the perfect parts of you, Andrew. I love the scars. But peace, as always, was only borrowed time. As Andrew drove Sophia to her new school one morning, flashing lights appeared behind them. A police car blocked the road. A uniformed officer stepped out, his voice crisp. Mr. Andrew Martin, you're under immediate arrest in connection with the Martin Holdings financial investigation. Andrew tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I'll cooperate, but not with a child in the car." "We have a warrant, sir." Sophia's small voice trembled. "Mom, what's happening?" Vivian held her close eyes locked on Andrew. He turned to her, his gaze calm, steady. "It's okay, princess. I have some things to fix." Then, looking at Vivian, "Trust me." The car door shut. The sound echoed like a verdict. The news exploded. Billionaire Andrew Martin arrested for suspected money laundering and mafia ties. Headlines screamed across every screen. The photos of him being led into custody were everywhere. Vivian sat motionless in the empty house. Sophia clutched her stuffed bear, whispering the same question over and over. "Is Uncle Andrew coming back?" Vivian had no answer. To the world, Andrew Martin was a fallen titan. But to her, he was still the man who had risked everything to pull her and her daughter out of hell. Vincent arrived later that afternoon carrying a thick folder. He set it gently on the table. "Mr. Martin prepared this in advance. It contains proof of his innocence, and something else he wanted you to know." Vivian opened it. Dozens of photographs, contracts, and one familiar name printed in bold, Michael Gonzalez. Her late husband. Her hands froze. "My husband. Why is his name here?" Vincent's tone deepened. Michael began investigating the Romano network 3 years before his death. He uncovered their trafficking routes along the East Coast. But he was silenced, and it was Andrew who found his body, not the police. Vivian stared in disbelief, her hands trembling. He knew. All this time, Vincent nodded gravely. He feared that if you knew, you'd hate him forever. Tears burned her eyes. She sank into a chair, the world spinning. Andrew, her savior, her protector, had also been the keeper of the truth about her husband's death. That night, she went to the detention center. The interrogation room was cold, colorless. Her heart broke when Andrew was brought in wearing a light gray inmate's uniform. He looked at her calmly, his voice low. "You shouldn't have come." She clenched her fists. "Why didn't you tell me about Michael?" He hesitated for a long moment before answering. "Because I knew if I did, you'd leave. And if I didn't, maybe I could keep you longer." Her voice cracked. "Do you realize you destroyed the trust between us?" Andrew's faint smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your trust in me was never built on truth, Vivian. It was built on fear of losing what little light you had left. And me, I only knew how to keep you by any means." She stood, tears streaming freely. "You were wrong, Andrew. You can't keep someone by hiding the pain that made them who they are." He watched her walk away, his gray eyes dark as the sea before a storm. "I know," he whispered, "but I'd rather lose you to the truth than keep you with a lie." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Vivian stepped out of the building, tilting her face toward the sky. The cold bit into her skin, sharp and real. Inside her, everything was chaos. Grief, anger, love, and something that refused to die. She knew he hadn't killed Michael, but she also knew that Andrew carried the sins of that world, like chains he couldn't break. And she who had once sworn never to love another man touched by darkness was in love with one so profoundly that there was no turning back. She closed her eyes, letting the snowflakes melt against her lips. In the silence, a prayer rose softly between her trembling breaths. "Please, give him a way back, before the past swallows us all." That morning in New York was cold, shrouded in a heavy mist. From the high balcony of the hotel where Vivian was staying, the entire city was cloaked in a veil of gray, silent, distant, and suffocating. She stood motionless, gazing down at the rush of people and cars below her thoughts, as tangled and opaque as the fog. It had been 3 days since she last saw Andrew at the detention center. His words still echoed in her mind, low, deliberate, and so painfully sincere that they refused to fade. "I didn't hide the truth because I was afraid you'd leave. I hid it because I knew it could destroy you." Vivian knew he hadn't exaggerated. Michael, her late husband, had been killed by the Romano syndicate, and Andrew was the only one who had found his body. He had promised the police to keep the truth buried to protect her from it. But now that everything had come to light, their trust lay shattered like glass underfoot. She wanted to hate him. God knew she tried. But her anger melted into sorrow every time she remembered the look in his eyes, the eyes of a man carrying a lifetime of guilt. The phone rang. It was Vincent. His voice was rough, urgent. "Miss Vivian, I can't speak for long. Mr. Martin has disappeared from the detention center." Vivian froze. Disappeared? What do you mean? The police are calling it an escape. But I know Andrew. He'd never run. Someone staged this, likely Victor's men. You must leave New York immediately. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her pulse racing. No, I have to find him. Miss, you don't understand. If Victor is involved, this isn't a simple matter of life and death. But she had already hung up. In her mind, only one thought was left. If Andrew were alive, he'd go to the only place he ever called the last haven. She drove through the night toward Connecticut. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the headlights into streaks of silver. The forest on both sides loomed in shadow, whispering through the wind. She drove silently, her heart pounding against her ribs. Each mile a prayer she didn't dare speak aloud. When the car finally reached the small villa, nestled among the maple trees, their brief sanctuary of peace, the rain stopped abruptly. The air was unnaturally still. The door was unlocked. Everything remained inside the half-drawn curtains, the faint scent of cedar and smoke, and the fireplace still holding a trace of warmth. "Andrew," she called softly. No answer. Then came the sound of footsteps from the stairs, slow, heavy, deliberate. Her breath caught. He appeared. His face was pale and gaunt, a shadow of the man she knew. Stubble darkened his jaw, and his gray eyes, once alive with quiet fire, were clouded with exhaustion and something darker. His shirt was stained with dried blood, the bandage on his shoulder loose and frayed. "What have you done, Andrew?" she whispered, voice trembling. He stopped before her, his gaze steady but filled with something unspeakable. "I didn't escape Vivian. They took me out Victor's men. He wants to trade." "Trade?" Her brow furrowed. "For what?" "You." She stepped back, her heart stuttering. "What are you saying?" Andrew moved closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Victor wants you. He thinks you're the key to breaking me. He knows I'd never let him touch you." Vivian felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "So you ran?" "To find him," he nodded, voice low and rough. "I have to end this, Vivian. If I don't, he'll never stop. You and Sophia will never be safe." Her throat tightened. "What are you planning to do? Meet him one last time?" Vivian stared at him, the man who had once terrified her with his power, broken her with his secrets, and now frightened her with his reckless courage. "You think you can kill Victor?" she demanded, tears already burning. "You've seen what he is, what he controls. You can't fight that." Andrew's jaw clenched, his voice raw. "If it costs me my life, so be it." "But he won't win." Vivian couldn't bear it anymore. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "I don't want you to die, Andrew. I want you to stay. Every time it rains, I think I've lost you again." He held her tightly as though letting go would collapse the world between them. "I know. But sometimes to stay, I have to walk through the darkness again." She lifted her face, tracing the hard lines of his jaw with trembling fingers. "Then let me walk with you." He shook his head slowly. "No, Vivian. He'll use you against me. Stay here for Sophia." "You can't keep deciding for me," she cried. "Have I crossed storms for you already?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his smile faint and broken. "I know. But this time, if you follow me, there's no coming back." That night, he left while she slept. On the table was a single note written in his familiar strong hand. "Don't look for me. If I don't return, tell Sophia I loved you both more than my own life." Vivian clutched the note until it wrinkled in her palm, tears spilling in silence. She knew he was gone. 2 days later, the headlines screamed again. "Explosion at South Pier, possible connection to Romano Syndicate." Several dead identities unknown. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered. The world went silent. She drove straight to the docks. Smoke still hung heavy in the air, the metallic tang of fire and salt thick enough to taste. Police lines barred the area, but she forced her way through. "I need to find someone," she cried. An officer caught her arm. "There's no one left, ma'am. We've searched everything." Vivian fell to her knees, the cold sea wind lashing against her face, tasting salt and despair. "You promised you'd come back." "Andrew?" she whispered, her voice breaking into sobs. That night, she returned to the quiet house in the woods. The silence there was unbearable. Sophia was asleep upstairs. Vivian sat before the dying fire, staring at the embers as though they could tell her how to keep breathing. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Don't believe what you see. Come to the place where I promised to show you the sunrise." Her heart lurched. It was his voice. His words, the same ones he'd said on that night they almost fled together. "One day, I'll take you to the sunrise on the Brooklyn Bridge, where the first light touches the river." At dawn, she went to the bridge. The city was still wrapped in fog, the pale sun stretching across the East River like a fragile thread of gold. And there, at the far end of the bridge, stood Andrew. He wore a black coat, hair damp with mist, face thinner, older somehow. But his eyes, those gray, unyielding eyes, still held that same quiet fire. Vivian's breath caught. She ran to him, tears spilling freely. "Oh my God, you're alive!" He opened his arms and caught her, holding her close, his voice barely a whisper. "I told you I'd come back, didn't I?" "I thought I lost you," she sobbed into his chest. "You almost did." When the explosion went off, Interpol agents pulled me out. They'd been tracking Romano for months. "I'm working with them now." "It's almost over." She pulled back, eyes wide. "You're cooperating with Interpol." He nodded. "I turned over every evidence I had on Victor and the syndicate. They're hunting him as we speak. I just needed to see you once before I testify." Her voice trembled. "Will you be tried?" "Maybe." He gave a faint smile. "But at least this time I'm not hiding in the dark." Vivian took his hand, feeling its warmth, grounding herself in the reality of his touch. "Do you think they'll forgive you?" He shook his head. "I don't need forgiveness. Please believe in me." She gazed at him, eyes glistening. "I once hated you, Andrew, but now I ache for you, because whether you're a sinner or a savior, your heart is still the man I love." Andrew's lips curved in that soft, weary smile she remembered from the peaceful days in Connecticut. "I've lived among men who didn't know how to love, but in the end, I was saved by yours." They stood there for a long time, the wind whipping through their hair, the city slowly waking beneath them. The river caught the morning light, scattering it like gold across the water. Then a distant explosion tore through the moment. Both turned sharply. Smoke rose once more, this time from the southern edge of Manhattan. Andrew's expression hardened. He gripped her hand. "It's Victor. He's still out there." Vivian's tears returned. "Don't go, Andrew." He cupped her face gently, his voice calm, unshakable. "I have to, because if this doesn't end now, we'll never see a real sunrise again." And before she could stop him, he turned and walked into the haze, his figure slowly swallowed by the smoke. Vivian stood frozen, her vision blurred by tears. The wind carried the scent of the sea salt metal in memory, and in her heart, a single prayer echoed like a whisper against the dawn. If fate must choose between truth and love, then let him live to love even one more day. Somewhere in that fog-shrouded city, Andrew Martin's shadow melted into the rising light, caught forever between sin and salvation, between the man he had been and the one her love was still trying to save. Morning in Manhattan felt like a cracked mirror, sunlight breaking through a haze of smoke after the explosion the night before, falling upon streets still tainted with the faint smell of gunpowder. The city never truly slept, but today it awoke in silence, the kind that follows a battle not yet over. Vivian stepped out of the hotel, her thin coat wrapped tightly around her fingers, clutching the folded note Andrew had left in her pocket. "If I don't return, believe I still went for you." She reread it, every letter carving deeper into her chest. Whenever she thought she had learned to live with loss, Andrew would return only to disappear again, like wind she could never hold. Vincent was waiting by the curb, his face pale, more lined than before. "Still no word from him," he said quietly. But Interpol traced Victor's cell signal near the old industrial docks along the Hudson. Vivian met his eyes, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm going. No, you can't. You once told me I was the first person who made him believe he could love again. So now I can't let him die in the dark alone." Vincent fell silent, then nodded slowly. Without another word, he handed her the car keys. The old industrial zone sat beside the river, its warehouses' long abandoned rusted doors sagging on broken hinges. The air reeked of oil iron and danger. Vivian stepped out the echo of her heels, soft but sharp against the concrete floor. The air was heavy dense with the residue of violence. She moved cautiously, heart-hammering until a gunshot cracked the silence. Then another. Her breath caught. She ran toward the sound, weaving between metal crates, until she reached warehouse number 47. 2 men lay motionless outside. Inside, the air was thick with smoke. She pushed the door open, and the world froze. Amid the haze stood Andrew and Victor. Andrew's black shirt clung to his chest, his arm-raised finger poised on the trigger. Across from him, Victor, bleeding from his shoulder, was laughing, wild and unhinged blood dripping from his hand onto the concrete. "You think killing me will free you, Andrew?" Victor sneered. "You've lived in sin all your life. You can't wash blood away with the love of a woman." Andrew's voice was ice. "You're right, but I can end it." He tightened his grip, but Vivian cried out before he could fire. "Andrew, stop!" Both men turned toward her, and in that heartbeat of distraction, Victor saw his chance. His gun flashed. The sound tore through the air. Vivian felt a brutal shove, and then Andrew was in front of her. The bullet hit his shoulder blade, bursting across his shirt like crimson fire. "Andrew!" she screamed, catching him as he fell to his knees. Victor's laughter echoed, crazed and echoing through the warehouse. "Fool! You'd die for a woman!" Andrew lifted his head, silver-gray eyes blazing. He raised his gun and fired. One clean shot. The bullet struck Victor square in the forehead. The laughter died on his lips as his body crumpled, a grotesque smile still frozen on his face, like a man who had just witnessed the irony of his own downfall. Vivian held Andrew close, tears falling unchecked. "Don't you dare close your eyes. You hear me?" He smiled faintly, voice trembling but tender. "This time, I'm not leaving you. The ambulance is coming, hold on." He shook his head weakly, blood spreading across his chest. Yet his eyes, those beautiful, unrelenting eyes, still held light. "Vivian, I used to think love made people weak. But then I saw you, and I learned only those who love are truly strong." She pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing, as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. "You're not dying on me. Not now, Andrew Martin." He chuckled softly. "You're still the stubborn one." And then his eyes closed, his breathing slowing to a fragile rhythm. 2 weeks later, the headlines read, "Romano Syndicate Dismantled." Mastermind, Victor Romano. Confirmed dead key witness, Andrew Martin, under protection at St. Luke's Hospital. The nation buzzed with speculation. The once cold billionaire who brought down an international crime empire had become both a mystery and a legend. But for Vivian, none of that mattered. The only thing that did was alive. She sat beside his hospital bed, sunlight slanting through the blinds. His skin had color again, and the wound was healing. Beside her, Sophia hummed softly, holding his hand, and singing the tune he had once taught her. "You are my sunshine." Andrew stirred, his eyes fluttering open. His voice was hoarse but warm. "I thought I was dreaming." Vivian smiled through her tears. "If this is a dream, I won't let you wake up." He let out a low laugh, struggling to sit up. "For the first time in my life, I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing something I haven't finished living." She took his bandaged hand in both hers, her voice a whisper. "Then, live. Don't be the billionaire, don't be the hero. Just be my Andrew." Time passed. The case closed. Andrew was sentenced to a suspended sentence under the condition that he cooperate and rebuild a humanitarian trust for victims of the Romano network. He renounced all his fortune, keeping only a modest amount to open a reintegration center for trafficked children. Vivian worked beside him. The small house in Connecticut was rebuilt and turned into a rehabilitation home. Each afternoon, children's laughter mingled with the soft notes of the piano played by Andrew and Sophia. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, beautifully quietly so. One autumn evening, beneath a silver moon, Vivian found Andrew sitting on the porch, a glass of wine in hand, his white shirt open at the collar. The reflection of moonlight caught in his thoughtful eyes. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly. "About Amelia. If she were still alive, she'd be about Sophia's age." Vivian touched his shoulder softly. "You've done what she would have wanted. You saved other children from the same fate." He was silent for a long moment before speaking. "But it was you who saved me, Vivian. I walked through this world without a soul, until I met you and remembered I still had a heart." She looked up, her eyes shimmering. "You talk as if I'm some miracle." Andrew smiled slow and sure. "Not a miracle, just the most beautiful reality I've ever known." The night breeze rustled through the red maples. He rose, extending his hand toward her. "When I was in the dark, I once wished that if I ever saw the light again, I'd propose to you under the calmest sky." Vivian froze as he knelt before her, eyes steady and full of warmth. He drew out a simple silver ring from his pocket, the moonlight catching on its small tear-shaped stone. "Vivian Gonzalez, you can forget the man I was, but please don't forget that I've loved you with everything left of a lost soul. Will you walk with me through whatever days we have left?" Her tears came before her voice. She nodded, breath trembling. "Yes, because if love can save someone from the dark, then you've already saved me." Andrew smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. They stood there under the quiet sky, the moon and stars glowing softly, reflecting in his eyes like a promise fulfilled. A year later, at the opening of the new center, journalists crowded the courtyard. The banner read, "Martin Foundation for Lost Children, a symbol of rebirth." Andrew stood on stage with Vivian and Sophia. His voice was steady, his words simple. "I once lived in a world that only knew how to take. I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to give." When he leaned down to kiss Vivian's forehead, the audience applauded. But for them, this was more than a ceremony. It was proof that something beautiful could still be born from ruin. That evening, they returned to Connecticut. The sky burned gold with sunset. Sophia ran across the lawn, her laughter mingling with the sound of the wind. Vivian rested her head on Andrew's shoulder, his fingers intertwined. "Do you think Amelia can see us?" she asked softly. He smiled, faintly, eyes on the horizon. "She can. Maybe she's smiling because I finally learned to love without fear of losing." Vivian's lips curved gently. "And because we learned to live even when we thought everything was over." The light of dusk wrapped around them, golden, tender, eternal. Andrew turned, pressing a slow kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for not leaving when everything was falling apart." Vivian looked up at him, her voice trembling with warmth. "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to walk through it." That winter in Connecticut came earlier than anyone expected. By dawn, the first snowflakes had already begun to fall, silently covering the glass roof of the Martin Foundation, where children's laughter still echoed through the warm air inside. Vivian stood by the window, a cup of steaming coffee in hand, watching Andrew crouch down to fix a little boy's shirt collar before a photo shoot. He was still the same meticulous, gentle calm, yet there was something different in his eyes that morning. A quiet distance, a restlessness she couldn't quite name. "Couldn't sleep again?" Vivian asked softly as they returned to his office after a busy morning. Andrew smiled faintly, trying to disguise the exhaustion behind his steady gaze. "I'm used to it, work piling up." "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's because you're hiding something from me." He said nothing, and sometimes silence is the most perfect confession of all. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Vivian heard muffled voices coming from Andrew's study. She approached quietly and pushed the door open, just a crack. Andrew was on the phone with Vincent, his voice low but urgent. "We can't let them touch the fund. I've moved the remaining assets into a secure account, but everything will collapse if the board uncovers the Romano link." Vivian froze. Them? And why was that name Romano resurfacing again, the ghost they had buried years ago? She stepped into the room. Andrew immediately ended the call. "You heard?" he said quietly. Her voice trembled. "You said Romano." You said they're still out there. He sighed, walked over and took her hand. I didn't want to worry you. But yes, Victor wasn't the last. Someone's rebuilding what he left behind under a different name. Vivian's breath caught. After all these years, you still can't escape them. It's not me they're after, he said, his eyes hardening. It's us. In the days that followed, the house no longer felt like home. Vincent's men were stationed outside. Security vehicles patrolled the estate day and night. Sophia, too young to understand, tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, why is Uncle Vincent living with us now? Vivian smiled, forcing calm into her voice. Because it's cold, sweetheart. He needs a place to stay. But at night, when the wind howled against the windows, she could hear cars stopping at the gate. Hushed voices, coded words, and sometimes Andrew's silhouette passing down the hall, a gun hidden beneath his coat. A week later, it happened. One morning, as Vivian was driving Sophia to school, she noticed the car's tire was slashed. On the white fence nearby, someone had spray painted in dripping red. No one escapes a blood debt. Her heart froze. She called Andrew immediately. He arrived within minutes, 2 black SUVs close behind. He crouched to examine the tire, his face impassive, but his silver-gray eyes were cold as steel. They know where we are. Who a new faction? They call themselves Valen Corporation. They're trying to resurrect the old Romano routes, and they see me as the traitor. Vivian's voice broke. But you left all of that behind, Andrew. You cleared your name. He lifted his gaze, and for a moment his voice was rough with something that sounded like grief. No one ever truly leaves the dark Vivian. You learn to live with it. That night, neither of them slept. Vivian found him later on the balcony, the moonlight painting his shoulders in silver. Are you afraid I'll leave you? She asked softly. He didn't look at her. No, I'm afraid that one day my past will take everything I love. She walked closer and laid a hand on his shoulder. I'm not afraid of your darkness, Andrew. I'm only afraid you'll lock me out of it. He turned toward her, then his eyes deep unreadable before pulling her into his arms. If anything happens, promise me you'll take Sophia and go. I can face the world, Vivian, but I can't survive losing you. She didn't answer. She only held him tighter, feeling his strong, uneven, painfully human heartbeat. 3 days later, disaster struck. The Martin Foundation was hacked. Its servers were breached and confidential files about rescued children were leaked onto the dark web. Andrew and Vincent worked through the night to contain the damage. Vivian stayed home, arranging for extra security, as Sophia remained at school under guard. Then the call came. A strange number. She answered, and a man's voice, cold and smooth, filled her ear. Hello, Dr. Gonzalez. Would you like to see your daughter again? Vivian's blood ran cold. Who are you? We only want what Andrew Martin owes us. Bring him to the Brooklyn Bridge. Alone, midnight. If he doesn't come, you'll never see the girl again. The line went dead. Vivian dropped the phone, her whole body trembling. When Andrew returned, she told him everything through broken sobs. He stood silent momentarily, then hurled his phone against the table. They touched Sophia. They'll regret this. No, you can't go alone. Vivian grabbed his arm, her tears falling fast. He cupped her face, his touch tender but unyielding. I lost you once, Vivian. I won't let history repeat itself. Promise me you'll come back, she whispered. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I never break my promises. Midnight. The Brooklyn Bridge shimmered in fog. Streetlights glowed amber over the dark East River. Andrew arrived on time with a long coat billowing and a briefcase in hand, the one containing the financial records they demanded. A black car waited at the center of the bridge. 3 men stepped out, their faces obscured by shadow. A voice from inside the car called out, You came alone. Good. Hand over the case. Bring the girl first. The door opened. Sophia stumbled out, blindfolded, hands tied. Unbeknownst to them, Vivian had followed, hidden in another car nearby. Her heart pounded so violently she could barely breathe. One of the men pushed Sophia forward, while another raised his gun. Andrew tossed the briefcase toward them, and in the same heartbeat drew his Glock and fired. 2 shots cracked through the night. 1 man fell. Chaos erupted. "Andrew, behind you!" Vivian screamed. He turned, but too late. The bullet tore through his shoulder blood, bursting across his coat. Still, he stood his ground, shielding Sophia behind him. "Run, sweetheart, run!" he shouted. Vivian darted forward, grabbing Sophia, pulling her away as Andrew fired again, the echo of gunfire rolling across the fog-bound bridge. The fight lasted seconds, but to Vivian, it stretched into eternity. When the last shot faded, Andrew was on his knees, blood seeping into the concrete eyes still fierce. Sophia broke free, sobbing, and threw her arms around him. "Papa, please don't leave me." He smiled faintly, brushed a trembling hand over her hair. "No one will ever take you from me again." Police sirens wailed in the distance. The kidnappers were caught alive. Andrew was rushed to the hospital unconscious, bleeding, but still breathing. 3 days later, in the sterile white of his hospital room, Vivian sat beside him, her fingers entwined with his cold hand, a pulse still faint. But there, Vincent stood near the door voice, thick with relief. He lost nearly 2 liters of blood, but somehow the bullet missed his heart. Perhaps God hasn't finished with him yet. Vivian looked at Andrew's pale face, whispering through tears. "You kept your promise. You came back." When Andrew finally woke, dawn had arrived. Winter light spilled through the curtains, soft and silver. Vivian had fallen asleep beside the bed, her head resting against his arm, her hair brushing his shoulder. He reached out weakly, his fingers threading through her hair, a tired smile forming on his lips. "Scared you again, didn't I?" he murmured. She stirred, voice hoarse with emotion. "You nearly killed me with worry." He squeezed her hand, whispering, "I understand now, Vivian. There's no darkness big enough to swallow what we have." She leaned in, kissed his forehead, eyes glistening. "I don't need a hero, Andrew. I need you." He held her gaze, voice trembling low and warm, like the final note of a long, hard song. "And I'll be here, always." Outside, snow continued to fall. Down in the courtyard, Sophia played with Vincent, her laughter ringing bright against the gray sky. Vivian stood by the window, watching, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. The storm had passed, yes, but she knew life would always bring new winds. Still, they had each other, now a love strong enough to weather whatever came next. She turned back toward Andrew. He was watching her too, eyes weary, but still burning with the same light she had fallen in love with. And in that room, filled with sunlight and snow, Vivian understood love isn't the end of tragedy. It's the beginning of rebirth again and again, for as long as the heart still beats. 6 months after the Brooklyn Bridge tragedy, spring had truly returned. The sky was clear again, and the wind carried the faint scent of cherry blossoms through the open windows of the Martin estate. Sophia ran around the garden, her white dress fluttering her laughter, bright as the sound of freedom. Vivian stood by the window, one hand resting gently on her belly where a new life was growing. A child born not from chaos, but from love, from light after the storm. Outside, Andrew was trimming the rose bushes. His sleeves were rolled up, sunlight glinting off the faint scar on his arm. No longer a mark of pain, but a testament of survival. When he looked up and caught her gaze, he smiled. That same smile reminded Vivian that no matter how much the world had fallen apart, they had still found each other. "I planted more white roses for you," he said as she approached. His hands were still covered in soil, but he held hers firmly anyway. "So that every time they bloom, you'll remember every wound can turn into peace." Vivian smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I don't need flowers to remind me of that. Every morning I wake up and see you and Sophia beside me, and I feel grateful." Andrew brushed a kiss against her forehead, whispering, "And whenever I look at you, I remember that love isn't just a feeling. It's redemption." That afternoon, they attended the opening of the second Martin Foundation branch in Boston. The hall was elegant but straightforward walls, lined with photos of the children they had rescued, each smile a minor miracle. At the center of the stage stood a new emblem, Hope in Bloom. Vivian held Sophia's hand as they walked up to speak. Her voice was soft, yet carried through the entire room. 3 years ago, I thought my life had ended in darkness. But some people, no matter how haunted by their past, still choose to rise, not because they aren't afraid, but because someone needs them to be brave. Her eyes found Andrew sitting in the front row. His gaze was gentle, full of quiet pride. We can't erase our scars, but we can turn them into places where the light gets in. And through those cracks, hope blooms. The audience was silent for a moment before breaking into thunderous applause. Andrew stood, walked beside her, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I'll never understand how I deserve you," he murmured. She smiled through glistening eyes. "You don't have to deserve me. You have to be here." That night, back at the hotel, Sophia had long fallen asleep. Vivian and Andrew sat on the balcony, looking at Boston's glowing skyline. The breeze carried the salty tang of the sea, the earthy scent of old stone, and a faint sweetness of wisteria from the streets below. Vivian asked softly, "Do you ever wonder if I hadn't walked into Bellanote that night, would we still have met, Drew?" Smiled faintly, his voice low. "No, because no matter where you hid, I would have found you, destiny." He shook his head. "No, choice. I chose to love you, change, and believe in something I once thought foolish." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I chose to forgive you and myself." They sat silently, waves murmuring below the harbor, their hands intertwined. Later that night, Andrew pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a letter worn and yellowed around the edges. "I wrote this after the hospital," he said quietly. "But I never dared to give it to you." Vivian opened it carefully. The ink was faintly smudged, as if written with trembling hands. "Vivian, if you're reading this, I may not be there anymore. I need you to know love doesn't have to be perfect to be eternal. I've made mistakes, but when I look at you and Sophia, I realize sometimes God doesn't punish us with pain, but with love, because love forces us to face who we truly are. If there's a next life, I'd still want to be Andrew Martin, but only if I could find you again." Vivian folded the letter, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She whispered that you don't have to wait for another life because I'm already here in this one. Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her close, their warmth, breath, and hearts all beating in quiet harmony. A year later, the American press called them the couple reborn from the dark. The Martin Foundation had expanded to 4 major cities, rescuing hundreds of children from trafficking networks. Vivian now led the foundation's trauma recovery program, while Andrew managed the international branches. They no longer lived in luxury. Their modest house on the outskirts of town was enough. In the mornings, Andrew taught Sophia to play piano. Vivian tended the roses in the afternoons, her daughter's laughter echoing across the yard. And in the evenings, they would sit with cups of tea discussing tomorrow, as if the world had never been broken. But life always knows how to test those who believe they've found peace. One summer afternoon, Vivian received a call from the hospital. "Mrs. Martin, we need you and your husband to come in. It's about his recent test results." Her heart clenched. She drove there at once. Andrew was sitting calmly in the examination room as the doctor explained gently. "It's nothing critical, but there are signs of post-traumatic arrhythmia. He'll need rest, or it could worsen." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "You knew, didn't you?" Andrew smiled faintly. "I didn't want to worry you. But maybe it's time I learned to slow down." She sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. "Love doesn't need you to be strong anymore, Andrew. It just requires you to stay." He kissed the back of her hand. "And I promise I'll stay until my very last breath." In October, on Vivian's birthday, Andrew surprised her. He led her to the empty lot behind their house, once his parents' old garden. A glass greenhouse now stood there, sunlight streaming through the panels. At its center bloomed a single perfect white rose. "I call it the Garden of Second Chances," he said, smiling. Vivian's eyes welled up. She threw her arms around him. "You always know how to make me fall in love with you again." He chuckled softly, wiping away her tears. "You're the reason I'm alive, Vivian. If anyone ever asks me what love is, I'll tell them it's you who taught me that even the lost deserve forgiveness." In that same garden, Vivian wrote in her journal late that year. Her belly was round now, and their son was due soon. Andrew sat across from her reading under the golden light of dusk, peace carved across his features. "Who do you think the baby will take?" after she asked. He smiled. "If it's a boy, I hope he has your eyes. If it's a girl, your laughter. And if he's like you, then you'll have to love another Martin." Vivian laughed, and then unexpectedly tears spilled over. I already love everything that carries that name. That winter, their miracle arrived. Vivian gave birth to a baby boy surrounded by joy and tears under the pale morning light. Andrew stood beside the bed, trembling as he held the child close. Welcome to the world, Lucas Martin. Sophia's eyes widened. Is he my little brother? Daddy? Andrew smiled. Yes, and you'll teach him how to love just like your mother taught me. Vivian watched them, her heart blooming like spring. In that quiet, sacred moment, father, mother, daughter, and son, they held each other knowing they had finally come home. 1 year later. The Garden of Second Chances was in full bloom. Roses lined every path, each petal carrying a story of storms overcome. Vivian walked through the garden with baby Lucas, while Sophia practiced piano inside the house. From the porch, Andrew watched them, sunlight wrapping him in a soft golden halo. You know, Vivian said, turning toward him, I used to think happiness was something rare. But now I realize it's simply waking up each day and knowing the people you love are still here. He slipped his arms around her from behind his lips, brushing her ear. And knowing that no matter what happens, I'll love you more than yesterday, but less than tomorrow. Vivian smiled, turning to kiss him, a long, gentle kiss, like the final note of a song that had finally found its resolution. On the garden wall hung a wooden plaque. For every soul lost in darkness, there's a light waiting to be found. Vivian traced the words with her fingertips, then turned toward the camera crew, filming a documentary about the foundation. Her eyes glowed with quiet conviction as she spoke. If you've ever walked through darkness, believe this. The light never disappears. It's only waiting for you to open your eyes and see it. Don't be afraid to love. Don't be afraid to forgive. And don't be scared to start over. Because sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the places you thought were the end. She reached for Andrew's hand, smiling softly at the camera. Share this story if you believe love can heal even the most broken hearts. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the white roses swayed in the wind, their petals catching the last rays of gold. And in that fleeting moment between now and forever, between loss and rebirth, their love continued to bloom, eternal and radiant, like the light they had finally found. The end. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.